This is the Classical Cafe. I'm Caitlin Matson-Levy. We welcome into the green room today Nicholas Bardonnay, who is a photographer and multimedia artist, the photochoreographer, which is the official term and something new that I learned recently. He is the artist who's worked with the Wichita Symphony Orchestra over the past few seasons. Anybody who has been to the symphony, or you've probably even heard about it or read about it, he's responsible for that gorgeous photo projection above the symphony, and most recently with the Rose of Sonora. So hello, Nicholas. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for having me.
So my number one question, and the one I want to lead off with, is what came first for you, the music or the photography? Were you a musician? Yeah, in terms of your background.
So most definitely the visual art side of things. I've always been very sensitive to music, but the synthesis of the two came together through my love of imagery and finding kind of the emotional core of that through music and being able to express something that maybe both art forms can't fully express on their own. Just like any good film, it requires an amazing soundtrack to kind of carry it through and create that sort of story arc. And I'm relying heavily upon that for this symbiotic relationship with the two art forms, and it can only happen in a live collaboration, which is a really fantastic part of it as well.
The name of your organization, your company, is Westwater Arts.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a little bit of history. It is not something that's just been founded in the last few years. It's pretty established.
Most definitely. I think we're in our 49th year, so edging on that kind of 50-year milestone. And my predecessor, James Westwater, founded the company. He's retired about, back in like 2013, 2014. And I've been kind of taking over the reins since then. And him and I worked together for a number of years and did collaborations together with orchestras and had a great time of it. I consider him a great mentor. And then, passed the torch, and I'm carrying it on, doing new projects and new collaborations, and some orchestras, working with some of the same orchestras, because it's like working with families, basically, a very large extended family when you work with an orchestra. And so people tend to stick around with the organizations for a very long time. And so these relationships that we've cultivated over time, it's wonderful to come back and, not only shoot the breeze, especially after something like a pandemic, and say, how have you been during this time? Like with the Wichita Symphony. Yeah, the last collaboration was shortly before the pandemic hit. So we had a lot to catch up on, basically, after those, what felt like 15 years of separation.
It did feel like 15. So with this Rose of Sonora concert that the Wichita Symphony Orchestra performed this month, so it was the Rose of Sonora Violin Concerto. There was then a program of American music. You had projections for Aaron Copland's Rodeo, and then also for Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings. Now, am I right to assume that if an orchestra wants, they can commission you to do something unique, one of a kind, to develop something that hasn't been developed yet? But these programs that the Wichita Symphony performed with those projections, those were things that you had already designed. Is that correct?
Correct. They were in my existing repertoire. And that's more typical, I would say. An orchestra, my repertoire is fairly extensive. It's got about 16 pieces currently. And so lots of different music options, as well as different thematic options. And so it kind of depends on what the orchestra is going from. I've shot pieces in Iceland, in the Czech Republic, in Mexico, our beautiful national parks. I used archival imagery to put together a World War I and World War II piece. I'm actually currently working on a fascinating piece for Edward Curtis, which is going to premiere next year, using the archival imagery of Edward Curtis and his documentation of Native Americans around the turn of the century, of the 20th century. Fascinating stuff. So it's quite diverse, actually. And I appreciate that about the versatility of my work, is being able to cover these different topics and share these different ideas, and also incorporate this amazing canon of music that we have at our fingertips in the classical world.
So you have this designed piece of photochoreography. You have the photo, you have the photography, you know what order they're going to be in, what displayed. There are different techniques you use, you're fading in and out and things like that. When you say you can choose several different pieces of music, do you mean that for one of your designed works, it can then be tailored to fit a small handful of different musical
Exactly.
pieces?
It's always like remixing the imagery. So so for the pieces that have multiple different music options, it not only gives orchestra the flexibility, but for me, it makes it more exciting too, because I get to kind of rediscover things about the imagery. And I always incorporate different sequencing because every piece of music is different. But being able to kind of retell the story of a given piece through a different piece of music, you'll probably notice if you look at some of the music options for a given piece, there's a lot of similarities in the overall kind of feel or the atmosphere that that piece creates. And that's what I'm looking for initially, is that kind of emotional backbone for the imagery. Because that is ultimately, as I was talking about before, what carries it through and what creates that kind of sense of awe and wonder in the audience. And that's priceless when you can have that, the matching of the two, the imagery with the music, and you have this kind of emotional response from people. That I would say
Yes.
that's what I live for when I go do these collaborations for concerts. And I actually have the same experience, like getting new things out of the pieces when I'm performing them in such a large scale of our huge 440 square foot screen above an orchestra. So it's like a giant canvas. And
Is that your screen? You travel with your own screen?
absolutely, all the equipment comes with me for these collaborations, and I actually work with the orchestra crew, the stage crew, and so forth to get it all set up, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a tight ship, as I'd say. And by managing these different facets of the whole production and working closely with the administrative staff of orchestras and as well as the artistic staff, you can ensure a very seamless performance, which ultimately the better performance we can give to audiences, especially in this period of time when we're trying to bring them back into the concert halls, is really important.
I want to talk more about the importance of a multisensory experience in today's day and age. And we will get to that in a moment. But first, we're going to take a small break. We're going to hear just a bit of Copeland's Rodeo. Saturday Night Waltz is what we're going to listen to, a few minutes of it. A teaser for people listening who will be tuning in tomorrow night at 7 o'clock for the Wichita Symphony Orchestra in concert. We are broadcasting the final Masterworks concert of this season, featuring Holly Mulcahy performing George Clinton's Rose of Sonora Violin Concerto. Also on the program is Copeland's Rodeo and the Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. We'll be back. Saturday Night Waltz from Copeland's Rodeo. That was a performance by the Cleveland Pops. I'm Caitlin Matson-Levy, and this is the Green Room on the Classical Cafe. Nicholas Bardonnay is with us. He is a photographer and multimedia artist. Most recently, he was collaborating with the Wichita Symphony on the Rose of Sonora concert. If you attended that, you saw his beautiful photographs projected above the symphony on Rodeo and Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings. And Nicholas, but this isn't the first time you've been working with the symphony. What else have you done recently?
With the Wichita Symphony?
Mm-hmm.
So prior to the world turning upside down, we had a fantastic concert using my three pieces technically, that I shot in Mexico. So I lived in Mexico for a whole year, which was probably one of the best years of my life, photographing this project and traveling around to 18 different states and really just getting to know our neighbor. And so we presented that for a very extensive educational concert series that the Wichita Symphony does. Hats off to them for doing that. I think we had something in the vein of like 6 educational concerts. Then we had an evening adult concert as well. And they had dancers and music and so on and so forth in the lobby leading up to the and games and all sorts of fun decorations leading up to the actual adult concert. So it was a very festive event. And Wichita surprisingly has a large Mexican American population, and so like it was a nice way for the orchestra to also reach out to that community, which maybe traditionally isn't going to classical concerts, and involving them in a way and performing music that is culturally relevant. So it was, and as well as imagery.
Yes,
it was a really special concert.
In terms of outreach, and also in terms of things that are culturally relevant and socially relevant. Some people might be, they might dig in their heels in terms of change when it comes to the classical arts. Why do we have to change the way we've done the symphony? We've always done it this way and it's been fine. And that can be said for studio art, it can be said for dance, it can be ballet, it can be said for all sorts of things. But in this day and age, we all just have to admit the importance of any sort of multimedia experience. And, this has kind of come about over the past 20 years with its smartphones, computer, technology, social media, the fact that we want to be stimulated not only orally, but visually. How do you find the tide is turning in terms of you and your photography and your art form?
I feel like for a long time, orchestras actually have embraced incorporating visual elements into their concerts. Partly because it's an enhancement. It's not the full concert typically. Like normally orchestras will program 2 to 3 pieces from my repertoire and then round it out with purely musical options as well. So it's a fairly well-rounded experience for the audience to kind of have the best of both worlds, so to speak. Um, Audience members, of course, are very visual, as you're talking about, with smartphones and television and films and all of those things. When I approach producing a new piece, I always try to do it in a sensitive way that's not going to overwhelm the music, but it's going to be complementary. So both art forms create kind of this marriage together that isn't really happening otherwise. And it's done in a very elegant way too. So that's a big part of it, and creating not necessarily a backdrop for the imagery, but not necessarily in the foreground as well. It's something kind of in between, I guess you could say. And that I think is trying to kind of be more respectful to the music, but also at the same time, I don't approach the music in like a literal way. I think it would be boring from a creative perspective and maybe from an audience perspective to think about the composer and what they were thinking and what they were going through in the moment and try to create some kind of literal interpretation of a given piece of music. It wouldn't be that dynamic. And so for me, I'm thinking about it more metaphorically, more symbolically, more emotionally. How does this music feel and what kind of real world subject matter, because that's an important detail of my work, what kind of real world subject matter relates to this feeling. And so presenting that, people are going to get different things out of that because everyone has kind of, they're taking their own life experience into the concert hall. And it's amazing what people will come back to me, actually where I met you after the concert. Folks come back and talk to me because I'm kind of an embedded guest artist. I'm not on the stage. I'm back in the audience seating area usually, and people can come find me and chat with me. And so it's amazing some of the comments I get and like the things that people get out of it, and they kind of relive memories of these experiences that they've had, like going to some of these places or experiencing these things. And that's really special, I think, that I can queue up these things for people and have this kind of multi-dimensional concert experience versus going in and just purely listening to the music, you know what I mean? Which there's value to that as well. And you can certainly close your eyes and imagine, you know, what the music inspires in your own mental image. But to add like a little bit of extra creativity is sure fun.
I have one more question.
Please.
When I think of anything being designed around music or in partnership with music, I think about the math involved, the theory involved, the rhythm involved. Do you study a score? Are you calculating time and how it relates to rhythm and beat when you choose your choreography?
So in a live performance setting, I'm actually live cueing hundreds of image transitions. So I've essentially memorized the music by listening to a given rendition of the music. So I listen to it from almost like a concert goer. I'm listening to a particular rendition that's done by a previous orchestra that I feel works well for the imagery and gives the audience time to kind of, whether it's a fast piece of music or a slower piece of music, it gives the audience time to kind of digest the imagery. You need a bit more time mentally just to kind of process imagery than you do music. Music is more abstract, so you can sort of instantly identify with it. Whereas imagery, if it's rushing by too quickly, there can be a point of frustration. And so
Yes.
I work very closely with the conductors that I collaborate with, and all of them are so open-minded. And actually, Daniel in Wichita is fantastic to work with. He's one of my favorite conductors to work with. He's so relaxed, and him and I are just very simpatico. So it was a pleasure to work with him again. And we have a couple of rehearsals to dial in the tempo, the live tempo. And, you know, conductors, they have metronomes in their head and they can follow things very closely. I'm never asking for perfection because I'm live cueing, so I can adjust a little bit.
But you're performing as well. This is a live performance for you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
That's
I'm
fascinating.
uber focused in the moment when I'm doing it, just like a musician would be. The only difference is my instruments are a projector, multiple projectors, a large screen, as well as a laptop and all the other things that make the magic happen.
Nicholas Bardonnay, thank you so much for being with me and talking about your photo choreography. For more information about Nicholas and what he does, westwaterarts.com is his website. It's a fabulous website. You can kind of get an idea of the art that he creates and also the different pieces that an orchestra would have to choose from. And you can read the very impressive list of orchestras that have a long history with Westwater Arts. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you, and just make sure our audience knows that you can tune in to the station tomorrow night at 7 o'clock to listen to the Wichita Symphony Orchestra broadcast. We are broadcasting Rose of Sonora with Holly Mulcahy on the violin, and of course, Maestro Daniel Heggie. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thank you, everyone.